those images and sound recordings. I can advise that attendees should not disclose any personal information of individuals, as that would infringe the data protection rights of that individual. May I please ask everyone to mute their microphones when not speaking? Can I also put on record my thanks to the staff for getting this into the first person, because that made reading that very much easier, so thank you. Apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Leslie Fage. Do we have any other apologies? No. Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest. Receive statutory declarations of interest from members in relation to, firstly, pecuniary interest and then non-pecuniary interest. Do we have any pecuniary interest? No. Do we have any non-pecuniary interest? Councillor Bond.
Item 10A, the variation condition land north of Lindsell's Crossing. I will leave the chamber for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Anybody else? No. Item 3, town mayor's announcements. I don't have any announcements this week. Councillor Russell, do you have any? No. Item 4, public open session, to adjourn for a period of up to 15 minutes to allow members of the public to put questions or to address the council through the chairman pertaining to matters listed on the agenda. Each speaker will give their name to the chairman prior to speaking, which will be recorded in the minutes, and each person will have 1 3-minute slot. So we don't have anybody in the chamber. Do we have anybody online? No. Okay, then I move on. Item 5, invited speaker. So we do have an invited speaker. So it's a pleasure to welcome Tom Price, Senior Sustainable Transport Officer from Central Beds Council, and I believe you're going to talk to us about electric vehicle charging points. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you. Just checking you can hear that. Yeah, thank you for having me along this evening. Just to update you on what we've been doing over the last 18 months with regards to electric vehicle charging, both in Central Bedfordshire and in Biggleswade. So I've got a slide deck here just to work through to update you. So just an overview of what I'll be covering. So I'll be looking at the sort of strategic context of why we're doing what we're doing and the reasons behind that. Looking at some of the information and data around demand and the growth of electric vehicles in that industry. The projects that we're working on with BP Pulse, who are our contracted charge point operator. Those 2 projects are listed below, so residential charge points and the building of the public network. Then I'll spend a little bit of time going through the sites that we've looked at in Biggleswade and where we've got with those. Finally, we'll just touch on the pilot scheme that we've been running for the last 6 months, and then a summary of what we're going to be doing looking forward. So, sorry, next slide, please. I must remember to say that because what I've got here doesn't link with that. But yes, in terms of the strategic context, central government have set the sort of strategy for electric vehicles and their rollout and the rollout of charge point infrastructure through the net zero strategy, the transport decarbonisation plan, and the UK EV infrastructure strategy. So there are various targets within those, the most obvious and important being that by the end of the decade, the sale of new petrol and diesel cars will be banned. And by 2035, that will be the same for hybrid vehicles. So all new vehicles to be sold in 2035 will be zero emission at the tailpipe. There's a requirement for at least 300,000 public charge points by 2030. And there's an expectation that 50% of those are to be provided through the public sector, both to meet current and future demand. The idea around that is to build consumer confidence to make the switch to EVs. And we're seeing that around us already, that there's considerable uptake in electric vehicles month on month. In terms of the local level, Central Bedfordshire Council have an adopted sustainability plan, which is our road to net zero for the council as an authority, which sets out our objectives and our areas of work, and EV charging is one of those. We also have the EV charge point plan, which outlines our approach to partner with private sector providers, in this case with BP Pulse, as they're best placed to fund, install, manage and maintain these networks. So quite an important point there as well is that within Central Bedfordshire, over 40% of the emissions that we have to deal with come from transport, and obviously we benefit from great road and rail links with the M1 and the A1, but that does bring with it issues of air quality, and I know that's the case in areas such as Biggleswade and Sandy, being so close to the A1. Those 2 plans are backed up by evidence of both demand and need, of what our understanding of that, a baseline understanding of where we are with charge point provision and electrical capacity, and then looking at forecasting. So what do we need to provide and what are our options to do that? and obviously that's led to in the large part a partnership with BP Pulse. Next slide, please. So with regards to the demand and the need for EV charging and the growth in that area, registrations of electric vehicles are growing month on month, year on year, as I said. Electric car sales are now second only to petrol in the UK. There's been quite a decline in the sale of diesels recently. In 2022, nearly 23% of new vehicle registrations were electric vehicles, and you can see the breakdown there. Primarily, that's battery electric vehicles, so 100% electric, and then there's also a place in the market for plug-in hybrids. There's some stats there on the number of EVs registered through the year, so you can see 14,500 were registered in January 2022, which was a 12.5% market share. That then steadily rose through the year to June, where there was just shy of 23,000. And then December, there was quite a large jump to 42,200, which represents nearly 33% of market share. Should be noted that that figure is somewhat inflated by car manufacturers being quite clever with their numbers, because the EU quite heavily fine car manufacturers if they're not meeting their carbon reduction targets. So if you take a vehicle manufacturer across the fleet of vehicles that they sell, they will have electric cars, and they will also have performance sports cars with large engines. They need to sell enough electric cars to offset the impact of the more powerful polluting cars. So if they're on track to not meet those targets, they will push through, probably through their dealer network, a lot of electric vehicles to be registered. So everyone was sort of raving that electric cars are, so, you know, there were so many registered in December just gone, but actually, you know, the reality is somewhat different. But you can see a climb, 4% between January and June, and that's continuing. So in December of last year, there was only 4,000 diesel cars registered, so that's only a 3.1% market share. So you can see that petrol is definitely the favourite of the internal combustion engine cars at the moment, but electric vehicles are here, and they are here to stay. There's an estimated 660,000 EVs already on the road, and just shy of 500,000 plug-in hybrids too. And all major car manufacturers are now producing and selling electric vehicles as part of their fleets, and are working on phasing out internal combustion engine cars. There is lots of other work going on in the motor industry with regards to synthetic fuels, but that is some way off being, and hydrogen as well, but they're both some way off being a viable everyday format for driving. And then you have to take into consideration that most businesses now have their own sustainability agenda and their own ambitions to transition their fleets to electric vehicles, and any company cars and vans are often going towards electric. So that, again, highlights the requirement for access to charging for residents. What we've learned over the last 18 months is there really is a requirement for a suite of charging options. So from slow charging speeds to ultra rapid, but also from using gullies, which you may have seen, and I'll come on to towards the end, to actually using platforms such as, there's one called Co-Charger, which is a little bit like Airbnb for your charge point on your driveway. So if you have a semi or a detached dwelling with a driveway and a charge point, you can rent that space out for a period of time and a price to another local resident who may not have access to charging, who may not have a driveway. So that target of 300,000 charge points by the end of the decade, there are already more than 300,000 domestic charge points on properties. So you could say that we're some way to meeting that if everyone unlocked that as a platform, but the reality is that's not going to be the case. So a little bit on the data that's projected for the number of cars on UK roads. Sorry, thank you. So you see the split for 2023, where the green and the blue sections are your hybrids, your plug-in hybrids, and your battery electric vehicles, which are rather small percentage of cars on the road. But even just in 3 years' time, to 2026, that grows quite significantly. And then again, battery electric vehicles are going from 3 to 10% to 26% by the end of the decade. And then by 2040, those targets that are in place for the end of the decade, you're really starting to see how they come into force with the rest of, let's say in 2029, you buy a petrol or diesel car that's already had quite a long period in its life cycle. Some projections just for sort of CBC, and this is data provided to local authorities across the country, so that we're all sort of working from a similar baseline. Not worried too much about the graphs, but focusing on the numbers at the bottom. There's a requirement for us this year, 2023 being the baseline year in this data, for us to have provided 145 7 kilowatt charge points. We've got a first phase being installed at the moment, which is delivering 96. So we are a good chunk towards building on what's already in the ground. So we're probably not far off that with our first rollout. 22 kilowatt sockets are less of an issue, and the reason for that is there's the two main types of charging are AC and DC. AC will be your 7 kilowatt, generally overnight charging, 6 to 8 hours. 22 kilowatt is a faster version of that, but a lot of vehicles can't charge above 11 kilowatts. So you're essentially only being able to use half capacity of that charge point. So the extra cost of putting 22 kilowatt chargers in is not really worth the fact that only a handful of vehicles on the market can actually charge to that speed. So that's why you can see that the orange on those graphs is mostly made up of 7 kilowatt chargers, because you want to be able to charge overnight when you need to at a slower speed. But there is a place in the market for rapid chargers, which are the last two there, the 50 kilowatt sockets and the 150s. We will have already met that if we manage to roll out the sites that are proposed for rapid charging, of which the Mill Lane car park is one of them, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, the next slide shows how those numbers jump. Next slide, please. Sorry, back one. Sorry, yeah. So now the baseline is 2030, so the end of the decade, and you can see that we're now at nearly 1,300 7 kilowatt charge points that are required. And again, not all of those need to be delivered by CBC, but there's an expectation that, you know, around half of them will be. So quite a jump, and really highlights why it's important that we try and get as many in the ground now, whilst the grant funding is there, and to front load that. The government want that to be the case to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles and to give people the confidence. And there is obviously a lot in the news at the moment that chargers are not being rolled out fast enough, etc. But it's really important that we try and get them in the ground when we can. Next slide, please. Oh, so just quickly touch on these. So this is some work that we've done with our consultants, WSP, on baselining and forecasting EV provision. The graph in the top left shows EV vehicle registrations in Central Bedfordshire from Q3 2015, and you could see there's a progressive upward trend there in the graph. The graph on the right hand side and the table reflect the same data, and they are they're the charge point targets that we need to meet as an area. Now, there are various different ranges in terms of forecasting. You never know exactly how many you're going to need, but let's say we're looking at the mid-range provision, which is largely what we're working to. By 2025, there needs to be 650 charge points available, and yeah, nearly over 1,400 by the end of the decade. So there's quite large numbers there. Next slide, please. A little bit more of a local context. So again, these are maps from the work we've done with WSP, forecasting uptake and demand. The map on the left shows forecast EV uptake. Obviously, you can see in most of our urban areas that there's sort of large orange and red areas that show there'd be a high forecast EV uptake in those places. And then the map on the right-hand side shows the expected demand for EV charge points. And that's, again, by 2030. So all of our urban areas, again, are orange, but there's a particular pattern on that map that shows that along the A421, the M1 and the A1, there's also going to be forecast demand for charging, as well as in towns and some of our larger villages. Next slide, please. This is sort of the critical information really for what a lot of the grant funding is focused on, and for the more tricky part of charge point provision. So the lack of off-street parking, because that's the big barrier for a lot of people. It's estimated that a quarter of the population in the UK don't have access to dedicated off-street parking, and we think that's slightly higher in central beds at about 33%. So the map on the left shows off-street parking availability, and Biggleswade, as well as Leighton and Hammeridge Dunstable, are probably the most obvious places where there's lots of blue, which indicates low off-street parking availability. So that is then borne out in the map on the right. All of those red areas show areas without off-street parking, and I've spent countless hours mapping that for most of our larger settlements across central beds to understand exactly where the need is. So there might be demand for charging, but we know that these people are going to need access to local charging because they can't do that at home. And there's quite a lot on the King's Reach estate, and it's not just living in a terraced house, for example. If you have a rear parking court where everyone parks in your cluster of the estate, it's not down to that individual homeowner to dig up that parking court and spend thousands to trench and put a charge point in. So those people all have difficulty accessing charging at home. So we include them within the people that need to be provided for. Next slide, please. And these are the two main projects that we're working on with BP Pulse. The residential charging provision is the bit that tries to address that off-street parking issue. So that's largely grant funded. There's a grant scheme that's been in place for a couple of years now, which we've tapped into, and I'll come on to that. And then there's an emerging fund, which also aims to target that gap in the market. So that's largely grant funded. That's the provision of 4 dual socket charge points, but essentially 8 parking bays worth of charge points using local car parks. That's a 6 to 8 hour charge time, mainly provided to cater for those residents who cannot charge at home. If you can't charge at home, you probably don't feel comfortable transitioning to an electric vehicle. The model of those is essentially local charging hubs, so installing them in car parks located within a 5 to 10 minute walk from the demand or the need. This enables access to charging and opens the door to the ownership. The rollout is focused on where the need is, and the agreement we have with BP Pulse is that the landowner, whoever that may be, whether that's Biggleswade Town Council or Central Beds, is entitled to a 50% share of the profit. Our role in that charge point rollout is as a delivery body, whereas on the other side with the public network, we're sort of acting as a facilitator to build that network with BP Pulse. So on to building the public charging network. That's the second part of what we're doing with BP Pulse, and that is 100% their investment into the area. That's largely the provision of 50 kilowatt rapid charge points, which will charge a vehicle in about 30 to 60 minutes. And they're mainly located at destinations along main transport routes and in urban areas, often co-located near town centres or cafes, etc., to provide access to local facilities. So I really think there's a strong opportunity there to increase trade in town centres and promote local economic growth. People coming off the A1, they need to stop. They'll have the choice of stopping in Sandy or Baldock, but if they can come into Biggleswade, it's likely that they'll park their car, walk into the town centre, shop, get a coffee, get something to eat, etc. So that rollout is focused on our main towns so that we have provision everywhere. There is unfortunately no profit share within that side of the contract because the cost of providing those units is far higher than it is for the 7 kilowatt units. Looking in a little bit more detail at both of those two projects. So the residential charging provision, thank you. We've looked at over 200 sites across central Bedfordshire so far. And from our work in the last 18 months, the largest constraint is the cost to connect to the grid. I was saying to Councillor Bond before that we've put some in the Market Square in Potton, and we were getting some flack for not putting them in the car park up the road. But the car park up the road, it was going to cost £100,000 just to get a connection in the ground. Whereas in the Market Square, it was about 10,000. So for us to apply for grant funding, there has to be certain thresholds that make a site viable. Other considerations are the obvious location. Is there the demand in the area and the forecast usage? Is it available 24 hours a day? Is there space on the site? And is it accessible? As I mentioned earlier, we've got 96 going in the ground at 12 sites, and that's thanks to £360,000 worth of grant funding that we've secured. The bulk being the car park in Biggleswade that is coming forward as part of that rollout. And work is scheduled to start on the 6th of February on that site, running through to the 17th. And we're hoping that those charge points will be operational in March. We are busy progressing a second grant fund bid, trying to get that in before the end of this financial year. And we have been looking at other sites in Biggleswade to try and widen that coverage. At this stage, it's only the St Andrew Street car park that is a possibility at the moment to include within that bid. Those sites are RAG rated, so red, amber, green. That is currently an amber site because the cost to connect to the grid there is 28.5K, whereas an on-budget site is really about 15,000. So we are due to make a decision next month, subject to the town council being in agreement that possibly could be taken forward. So what we need to try and do is understand how many sites are under budget and whether there's enough scope to be able to include sites such as that. In terms of building the public charging network, thank you. So I'll be done in a couple of minutes, not too much longer now. BP Pulse have assessed modelled options across central Bedfordshire, including sites that we've put forward, because our main remit for this side is to ensure that within our main towns we have rapid charge point provision. So we've got rollout going in Biggleswade, Dunstable, Hatton Regis, Leighton Buzzard, Sandy, Shefford and Stopfold. Ampton and Flitwick are unfortunately missing from that list because there are just no workable sites in those two towns. So we're going to have to look at some other sort of provision there. Through BP Pulse's work, they've identified that they could install 2 rapid charge points within the Mill Lane car park and invest in Biggleswade. Every rapid charge point has the requirement for 2 bays per charge point. So there would be 4 bays in 4 bays worth of space. They are accessible bays to allow people who are disabled and with accessibility issues to use any of those bays. So that does mean.
Sorry, Tom. Sorry, if you have a question, just indicate. Carry on. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, so there is a requirement to repurpose more than just the like for like in terms of bays, because they will be slightly wider. And I suppose that's balancing the impact on existing parking pressures. And I'm completely aware that parking is a big problem in Biggleswade as well as every other town in central Beds. So it's a balance of being able to repurpose those bays and versus receiving this provision and investment in the town. As I mentioned earlier with the A1, as demand grows and usage grows, passing traffic off the A1 will drive trade in the town centre. Most people don't want to just sit in their car for half an hour, 45 minutes while it's charging. So the current part of the process that we're at the moment is working with landowners, i.e. me coming to these meetings and discussing where we are with proposals. And if everything's agreed on the sites that we're looking at, then we would expect installations to happen during 2023. Next slide, please. You will have all seen this, hopefully, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but they are all the sites that we've looked at in Biggleswade, forming part of that list of 200. The greens are those that are going forward or that have been proposed. The oranges are those that have a possibility of coming forward. The Orchard Centre being one which I would like to explore in the future, because in terms of the demand that I showed you earlier in King's Reach, that is a fairly centrally located site. And I understand it's still held by the developer, the consortium of that, but there's a process of it being transferred to Biggleswade Town Council at some point. So perhaps one we can look at in the future. Unfortunately for the others, perhaps the car park is too small or the land is in private ownership. BP Pulse won't invest on private land, and we can't put sites forward for grant funding unless they're local authority owned, be that CBC, town council land, highway land, or in some cases, if it's a village hall, maybe a community trust or something. So instantly that blocks out a lot of sites. But yeah, we are in the long term going to have to think slightly differently as to what that looks like. There'll be a little bit on the last slide about what we're doing looking forward, which will hopefully capture some of that. So next slide, please. 2 more left. Another thing that we've looked at and that we've been trialing for the last 6 months is the gully, which is a cable channel installed in the pavement to allow the safe trailing of cables from property to vehicle in areas without off-street parking. So if you've got a terrace property, we've had numerous emails from people saying, you know, is the council okay with me using a black box to cover my charge point, cover my charging lead? The answer is no, and it's a big grey area for most councils because that's still an issue for anyone with a mobility issue or a wheelchair. Solutions like this are being trialled across the country. We were one of the first councils to trial this. It's a government-backed and Innovate UK funded product. We installed it at 20 locations across Central Beds, 2 being in Biggleswade, 1 on the Bulk and 1 on Sun Street, which you may have seen, due to get feedback from participants in that by the end of Feb. And hoping to report back on that sort of March, April time. And if successful, there's the potential to offer it as a wider solution. And it is another solution for those people without access to off-street parking. And in terms of the benefits of this, it's a lot cheaper than putting a charge point in outside your house. And it allows you then to use your own domestic electricity supply, which is the biggest benefit, to be honest. Much more difficult at the moment in a cost of living crisis with energy bills, but longer term, that hopefully won't always be the case. And lastly, looking forward, just some of the things that we'll be doing through the rest of the year. So the installation of those 96 charge points started this month and will be going through until March, including the Bulk. We'll have another second bid going into the on-street residential charge point scheme fund. Continued rollout where possible to ensure geographic spread. So we want, you know, a few sites across towns, etc., to meet the demand. Installing rapid charge points such as the ones in the Mill Lane car park to build that public network, giving us various different types of charge point. The Levi Fund is the emerging grant scheme which launches very soon, which will sort of supersede the on-street residential charge point scheme. That has been piloted for most of 2022, and actually the scope of that has changed somewhat to focus more on those people who cannot charge at home, which is great news because that's the biggest gap in the market. That will continue the public-private partnership. The government is looking for private charge point operators to sort of match fund what councils will be getting through that scheme. But another part of that, and other people, you may be aware that in some areas they actually use little street lighting columns to charge cars. We'd sort of discounted that because the charging speeds can be quite low. So you know, if you're looking at charging a Tesla, it could take 24 hours. But every solution has its place, and where you can't charge locally, that does give you an on-street convenient charging option, albeit speeds will be slower. So that's something we're going to be looking into this year. And again, just continuing to develop our understanding and build evidence and exploring other options. Anything that comes to the market, there is another gully solution that we're going to be looking at and hopefully trialing. Electric vehicle car clubs. So trying to get away from second car ownership and having electric hire cars in some areas. We're trialing them in the east of Leighton, Biggleswade and Hatton Regis North developments at the moment. And then, for example, transitioning the council's fleet to electric. But yeah, that's a lot of information I appreciate, and thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, we have a few councillors indicating. Councillor North. Could you put your microphone on, please?
Why do you need 2 spaces per charging point?
So in the rapids, this is largely to get rid of parking wars. So if in normal, in rapid chargers up to now, they've generally been 1 socket, 2 bays, because you'll park and someone will be plugged in charging, and then the next person will be waiting in the bay next to you. So then that person unplugs and you plug in there, and that space becomes free for the next person, rather than someone waiting in a parking space that they don't need, or waiting in the middle of a car park causing a blockage. So there is a requirement for that sort of park and go.
Oh, right, okay.
And then the fact that they're building them to accessible standards does mean that they probably do take another bay or two out to make space for those, but it does mean that they're built to accessibility standards.
And would you expect people to pay the parking charges while they're there?
That really does depend on the landowner of that car park, to be honest. In some ways, people overstaying their welcome is managed automatically, really, because if you're plugged in and you're fully charged in a rapid charge point, you're still being charged by BP Pulse to be in that space. And if you're there longer than a certain period of time, you'll be fined. So it sort of self-manages. It's, the turnover self-manages. For some of our car parks, we've taken the view that we are not going to charge people to park, because we're essentially providing them with a local charging option that they don't currently have. So it would be somewhat unfair to charge them to park whilst they're paying to charge when they can't do that at home. So their only option is to use a local car park to do that. And we do think a lot of that charging will be overnight, because people will, be using the car during the day. They'll park the car at 6 in the evening and then come back to it at 8, 9 in the morning. And overnight the car will have charged. So there may be less of an impact in the day. Worth noting as well, actually, because I didn't cover in the presentation, that whilst there's a requirement for 8 bays with the residential charge points, we are taking the approach of most sites to only make 4 of them EV only. So the others can be used by anyone. So it limits the fact that we'd be taking 8 bays of general parking where there's already a pressure, and then making that they're only EV only. Because the idea with the number of charge points putting it is somewhat to future-proof it. So the demand might not be there for all 8 of those bays to be used every day now, but there probably will be in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So put them in now, do one lot of digging, etc. Pay the cost now, and while the capacity on the grid is there, do the work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Knight, you had a question?
5 questions. So firstly, thank you for coming.
Sure.
I do wonder if an informal meeting would be useful, because I have quite a lot of questions, and I don't know if we want to spend an hour and a half.
Yeah,
through
I appreciate
tonight.
I covered a lot. I mean, I can,
in brief,
yeah.
I'm concerned about the idea that a private company could put their infrastructure in, and it all depends on the definition of profit. But if they are generating a profit and therefore they're getting a return on investment, I would expect that to be shared with the landowner. And I'd like to know much more about that. And it feels like it's all about how you define profit.
Yeah.
So very comfortable with a 50-50 split, but they must be expecting to make money out of this over some time scale. And therefore, over some time scale, I would hope the landowner would start to get some reward for providing that space.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand the duration of the agreement. So if we were to agree to allow BP Pulse to go into Mill Lane, are we signing for 5 years, 10 years?
7 plus,
7,
7 plus 3, yeah.
Thanks. Lots of detail there. Costs for users and affordability. So there's a lot in the news. Electricity has become very expensive. It's no longer cheap to drive an electric car. And, there are certainly some estimates that it's now cheaper to drive diesel if you look at the price per mile.
Yeah,
because of the cost of charging.
Yeah.
What can be done to help with affordability, and who sets the prices, the tariffs that people pay? Is that regulated in some way, or is it entirely set by BP Pulse?
Yeah, it's entirely set by BP Pulse.
Okay, so that worries me. Again, if we're providing a service in part by providing the land, I would expect us to have some influence around the tariff that the company is offering, given that, especially if they're going to keep all the profit.
Yeah, I mean, from a CBC perspective, the decision was taken by members that we would follow a supplier funded model. So they didn't want to put any capital into it unless, there may be a few £1,000s for some enabling works where we're hitting blockages, but it was seen that the private sector were better to manage that and roll that out rather than us setting ourselves up as a charge.
I support that. And then I just think they should
be able to have some more. We would love more control over it as well, from a point of view of tariffs. In some respects, if we can work with other operators in the area rather than just having everything to be provided by one, then there becomes a competition. You're not just everyone has to be charged the same rate.
I would just like to see the town benefit as well as the shareholders of BP.
Sure.
Costs for users were talked about. Is the local distribution network up to the job? Because I understand in some areas of the town it's creaking, so that's essentially the cables under the road. And finally, reliability. I know there are a lot of these public charging terminals that are out of service these days. You know, you turn up, you try and plug in, doesn't work. What's the SLA? How quickly will they fix them if it goes out of service?
Sure.
That ends for now, thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. If we just have a pick that up offline. Yeah.
Okay,
There's a lot to
fine.
cover there. Yeah.
I thought you might have some detailed questions, Councillor Knight. Okay, we've got two more indicating. I'm going to take them both at the same time, and then we'll draw to a close. Councillor Woodhead, then Councillor Strawn.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Just a few quick points. First of all, I've seen the street lighting columns, the charging points in Windsor, and they have them actually in the ornate sort of Victorian style, and they actually do look quite tasteful. So I think there are lots of different options you could probably explore then, and some that would actually look quite nice within Biggleswade itself if that becomes an option later on. I live on the Bulk, so we seem to be a sort of electric car sort of testing laboratory at the moment. A lot of electric vehicle owners do live on the street actually as well.
Yeah.
And the gully channel is about 2 doors down from where I live. I must say, I've not seen anyone have any problems with it or anything like that. It seems to have blended in very well. So sort of anecdotally, I think it's been quite successful. My specific point is really about the Bulk car park further down the street. You were talking about the 4 spaces for 8 or potentially 8 bays in future that you're going to sort of take to one side. I mean, I think that's I think that's the right thing to do. But obviously, you've got Lawnside School just around the corner. That car park is utterly manic in the mornings and sort of 3:30 in the afternoon. And I worry that people who don't need electric car are going to sort of park in the electric car charging bays and all this sort of stuff, and there could be a bit of a
that's actually the
could be
case
problems
on quite a few other sites that there's a concern that, and to be pragmatic, we don't really have an issue. What else can you do that for 2 periods of the day for 30-45 minutes? It's going to be a bit crazy on the site, and people are going to park there, but actually outside of those times, it's going to be normal again.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, it's a very heavily used car park anyway, but it's just flagging that up. Obviously, the school's around the corner. There's also the newly refurbished library will have opened in the summer, which may attract people as well. So it is a busy little car park, and it's just trying to manage that. If you're going to knock out a number of spaces, just obviously cuts down because most people can't park outside their house on that street as well. So it puts additional pressure on the car park. So just something, if you're already aware of it, great. But otherwise, I think it's a great idea to put the chargers there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the big limitation with the gully actually, is being able to park outside your house. But the reality is you probably only need to charge twice a week, maybe. Depending on the mileage you do. So,
Thank you. Last question then, Councillor Strawn.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for coming this evening. It's been very enlightening, and it's nice to see an officer from Central Beds Council coming out to a meeting like this.
nice to
I think it would be very helpful if we could have a meeting where we can go into more practical details. Some of my colleagues have raised quite detailed questions. I have many concerns over practicality, cost, feasibility, and how it's going to work. I don't envy your job because I don't think it's feasible or practical to achieve what you're being instructed to achieve within that timescale. I think there are many, many problems. Some of your maps have shown that there's areas that there are difficulties in providing this service. So perhaps we could ask you, if colleagues would be agreeable, to invite you to an informal meeting to go through the practicalities and answer some of the detailed questions that have been raised tonight, because I think that would be helpful in our understanding. It's not fair on you or the council or anybody watching to go and have a full-scale debate any further. So thank you very much for coming.
No problem at all. Yeah, if you can email your questions over, so at least I have sight what they were.
I'm sure Councillor Knight will do that, and I think as soon as we're ready to see some perhaps slightly more concrete plans around what Mill Lane and the Bulk being the 2 green on the red amber greens, I think would be very keen to engage in that dialogue and get into some of the real detail. Not least because one of those car parks is ours, of course. Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much for coming to.
They're both Biggleswade Town Council car parks, aren't they? Mill Lane and St Andrews.
I thought I mentioned the Bulk.
Sorry, the Bulk is CBC.
Yeah, the Mill Lane is ours.
Yeah. And then possibly St Andrews, because that's I suppose the next step for me is if you can discuss or consider the use of those sites.
If the funds exist for St Andrews, because it's more expensive, but that's fine.
Yes, and we'll hopefully have a decision on that next month.
Perfect.
So
well, we look forward to engaging in dialogue, perhaps sometime next month, and going into the detail around that, if that's okay. Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Tom.
That's
No
all right,
need to
yeah.
stay for the rest of the meeting, but thank you ever so
Yeah,
much for.
great
thank you ever
stuff.
so much for
Cheers.
coming. Item 6, members' questions. Any members have any questions? No. Item 7, minutes and recommendations of meetings. For members to receive the minutes of the town council meeting held on 13th of December. 13th of December? Are they? January. 10th of January. Well, what the heck am I looking at? Oh, I'm at, we on page 2? No, if you read 7A, it says Tuesday the 13th of December. Right, okay, so we're on 10th of January. I'm going through these for accuracy first of all, please. Let me just get my agenda and minutes sorted. Accuracy, page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Councillor Russell.
I think the item 10A, the planning application, doesn't actually explain what had happened. So I proposed some amendments to the letter of objection which had been circulated. And I think it should say letter of objection which had been circulated. And then it was resolved that the town council strongly object to this planning application on the grounds of the letter circulated in the town council agenda pack with the amendments proposed. And then we could take out which must be sent to senior central beds officers and attaching and just say that it should be sent together with the transport consultant's report. It was a report, not a review, really.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Okay,
I think otherwise it doesn't make it clear that the amendments that I put forward were proposed. It says that we would send in the letter as circulated with the agenda pack, which isn't right.
No, we received the letter. We made some amendments in the meeting,
Yeah.
and the instruction was to send it to central beds with the report attached.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We can change that minute.
Right.
Anything else on page 9 for accuracy? Page 10. Page 11. You had one, Peter. 13B. Some very points, yeah, okay, some very good points, I think, because they were very good points. And I'm the chairman, I'm not a chair. Councillor Russell.
The Asda car parking item. The response from Asda regarding car parking was highly insufficient. Perhaps just lacking. I think highly insufficient is a funny way of putting it.
Okay, lucky.
But more importantly, we were writing to Lord Rose as chairman of Asda, not CEO.
Yeah.
And then I don't really think we need as chair that in the second paragraph. Some very what points were made.
That was, yes, good.
Good points were made. Also see some traction through media channels. It doesn't need the in there. So, and on where it says agreed that the town council parking is free evenings and weekends, not just at the weekend.
Thank you.
Sorry to be so pedantic, but
we know that the people that you are liaising with at Asda pick up on these things, so I understand the need for that. Okay, are members comfortable with those changes? Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Anything else on page 11 and page 12? No, so subject to those changes, we're happy that those are accurate. Is that all right? Yeah. Thank you. We're going through them for matters arising. Same set of minutes, which is the 10th of January, page 7. Matters arising, page 8. Matters arising on page 9. I have one actually, 10A, and it only occurred to me today that we should probably send our response to Hallam Land Management and Carter Jonas, so that they can be in no doubt as to what our views are on their planning application. It's something that they've raised before in public about the fact that we didn't send one of our responses to them once. So I think just to make sure that we covered all bases, we should simply forward that email. Anything else on page 9, matters arising? Page 10, page 11, page 12. No, okay. Item 9A, items for consideration, preset financial year 23-24 for members to receive and consider a report from the Town Clerk and Chief Executive. Councillor Pullinger, you are Chairman of F&GP. Would you like to introduce this?
Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to thank officers for the quick turnaround of the numbers and preparation of this report following last week's F&GP meeting. We've faced a number of challenges in determining the precept this year, and the biggest impact being the national settlement by the Local Government Association for staff salaries that not only impacts on the 23-24 budget, but has also required retrospective payments for 22-23. As the staff costs at the council contribute around 2/3 of our overall spend, that impact is significant, and without identifying any additional savings, the impact of the staffing costs alone would be greater than the increase that we are now proposing. We've also been impacted, as of all our residents, by increased costs due to inflation, particularly in respect of energy prices. If we were to include everything in the budget that we might have done for next year, that could easily have resulted in a preset increase of over 13%. But in times when residents are facing increased bills, that would not be an appropriate way forward. So we've scrutinised the budget very closely, finding significant savings across many budget headings. And in particular, as agreed at F&GP last week, we've decided to delay the replacement of some ageing vehicles by at least a year, at a saving of 24,000, and also to reduce our IT budget by 3,000. We're also conscious of the need to continue to drive improvements for the town, whether that's the playground redevelopment at Franklin's, and in coming years, other playground refurbishments, the refurbishment project at Grove Road Cemetery, and the installation of CCTV across the town centre. It's important that such projects continue, which is why the proposed budget does still include provision to continue to make appropriate capital investments. So I think overall as a council, we should be proud that we've achieved a proposed preset increase that is well below inflation. The budget for next year will be tight, but it is manageable, and it still allows the council to deliver for the residents of Biggleswade. So I would like to formally propose that we set the preset at £1,533,241, which equates to an increase of 7.48% for a Band D property. And that's in line with the recommendations of the Finance and General Purposes Committee and the Responsible Financial Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pullinger. Is there a seconder for that proposal? There are seconders for that proposal. Comments, colleagues? Councillor Knight.
Okay, thank you. I would have preferred a 0% change, but I recognise inflation has driven costs. So I'm really delighted we've managed to achieve nearly 2.5% reduction since the draft budget options we considered last week. And I think 7.48% would represents a really good result for Biggleswade. So I'll be supporting this. I'm concerned that detailed per departmental budgets weren't included in the pack. I note they were on SharePoint, but I think that should be in the public domain. So perhaps they could be shared on the website or something, but I think residents should have visibility of how the money is being spent. But other than that, I think it's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Yes, it is worth stressing this figure, if it were to be accepted, is 3% below CPI rate of inflation, which is the preferred measure. Any further comments? Councillor Foster.
Yeah, just on the bullet points, it says calculate a separate account code for overtime. Does one calculate a code?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And white fleet, is that like white goods in a kitchen?
It's the vehicles. It's 3 specific vehicles related to.
Okay. I've never heard that term before.
No. Okay.
Oh.
Only one of them is actually white as well. It's worth stressing. So maybe we need another term.
I wouldn't want to have gotten it wrong.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Councillor Foster. Any further comments, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, can I say thank you to the clerk for spinning these numbers around quickly from the F&GP meeting we were at. And well done to Councillor Pullinger for overseeing this, because it's an extremely difficult year with everything going up above 10%.
it appears, plus the gas, electric, etc. And I think we've done a good job to get it back down to something that's manageable. I too would prefer naught, but we can't always reach that. We've got to have a fiscally responsible council, and the RFO, the clerk of the RFO, has to oversee that. But I think this is the best we could have managed this year, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Foster, Mark Foster.
Thank you. Again, I echo the thoughts of my colleagues here, so I'm not going to duplicate that. But what I would like to say is that I think it's important that we are positive about what we're able to deliver. And I think the communication that we need to offer our residents is absolutely critical, because whilst 7.48% is under inflation rate, I think residents would clearly need to understand what that looks like in their pocket. We need to make sure the comms around the investment and everything is very, very clear. So we've got it's not necessarily a brilliant news story for everybody, but it is a good news story in terms of what we're able to achieve. And I think we need to make sure, once this decision is made, that we've got the comms right and we go out as soon as absolutely as possible, because it's absolutely vital that residents understand what's going to hit. Because I think the other thing to consider is that council tax, the town council element of council tax, isn't the only council tax, and I think it's trying to make sure that it's clear to everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. And something we have spoken about in the past is actually having a supplement that goes in the letter that people get with their council tax. I think we need to explore that early this year if we can. Peter, did you want to comment?
Very briefly, obviously we have reached out to Central Beds before about that very same item, and that opportunity has been declined, but we will try again. Rob and Helen are very much aware of what members have been saying about how important our comms is. And I've given some advice, particularly to Rob, about how we frame that and how quickly we need to get that out and stress a positive message. So I'm sure they're cognizant of that, and we'll do that soonest.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Bond.
I was going to make a comment to the clerk. If you have any issues trying to do that, please copy me in and I'll see if I can help.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any last comments? No. So the proposal is for members to accept a precept of £1,533,241, which is an increase of 7.48% on last year. Is everybody clear? All those in favour of that proposal, please show. Any against? No, that is unanimous. Thank you. And thank you to officers for doing that work. Sometimes members, even members, never mind residents, don't see that there is only one working day to turn around these figures from the F&GP recommendation, which is not an easy thing to do. So thank you for your efforts on that. Item 9B, Public Work Loan Board Governance Process. So this was something that I requested to come onto the agenda, which is essentially a motion resolving that any spend via or using Public Work Loan Board monies is specifically approved, both the amount and the purpose, via a resolution of council first. The reason, if I may just introduce this from the chair, the reason I requested this was from discussions as now that the Public Work Loan Board, the first wave of monies have arrived with us, we've been very diligent over the process around Franklin's Recreation Ground, for example. That's all gone via PLOS and via council. I think we need to make sure that any other spending for whatever purpose has that same check and that same balance, because for money which is going to be repaid over 25 years, I think we need to be very careful that what we're investing in has a lifetime and benefit to the town of at least that long. So that was my reasoning for asking for this to come onto the agenda. Are there any comments? Councillor Strawn.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with the sentiments behind it. But is this an attempt to be, should it be included in standing orders, financial regulations? How should we be implementing this? Because it's all very well passing the motion, but unless it's in standing orders or financial regulations, it's not clear and could easily be overturned in comparatively easy style. So is it an attempt to amend standing orders? Is it amended financial regulations? And what is the correct procedure, please?
It's not an attempt at replacing either, but it's mindful that in advance of council meeting, in advance of the next council from May, we will hopefully revise our financial regulations. At the very least, this would be a stopgap. But I think Peter has a comment, and then I'll come to Councillor Pullinger.
I'll keep it very brief. There are 5 key documents that we need to reflect upon before new council. Spoken to the mayor and deputy mayor in regard to this, and also the chair of FMGP. 2 of those are standing orders and financial regulations, which will need to take into consideration any vote that you may make in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. So I completely agree with the what is proposed in terms of the control. I think I would like to propose that we make this resolution as stated in the papers, with the addition of that just a statement that the due consideration should be given to include this provision within the financial regulations at the next update.
Yeah,
we can't commit ourselves to do that until we actually consider the financial regulations, but I think just to capture the fact that the intent is to at least consider including this within the financial regulations on a more permanent basis.
Thank you, Councillor Pullinger. Okay, that sounds like a proposal. Is there a seconder for that? That has been seconded. Okay, further comments? Councillor Frank Foster.
I'd like to see the PWLB written in full at least once in the proposal, please.
No, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that from the chair. No, this was my fault. My fault. I'm a sucker for acronyms. I'm very sorry. I agree. Actually, let's write it out every time. Thank you, Councillor Foster. Always like your interventions. Anybody else? No. Okay, so we have a proposal. So subject to adding on at the end that due consideration is given to this this resolution in future iterations of the financial regulations, and that we spell out that PWLB stands for Public Work Loan Board. All those in favour of that proposal, please show. And that's unanimous again. Thank you. It could leave us on a legally dubious footing if that happens to stand for something else. I don't know what PWLB might stand for. Okay, item 9C, change in date of Personnel Committee meeting. The chairman of the Personnel Committee has requested that there be a meeting change from Tuesday the 7th of February to either the 20th or 23rd of February. If a change of necessary, then officer's preference would be the 23rd. Now, Councillor, I'll counter Councillor Woodhead first, if that's all right, seeing as you're the chairman of personnel. Are you happy with those dates?
Yeah, no, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, to be honest. For personal reasons, I'm unable to attend on the 7th, and I think there's a number of issues that I think we need to cover in sort of detail. So I just wanted to give officers a bit more time to prepare papers as well. So I'm just looking at a date towards the end of the month rather than the 7th. So yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhead. Councillor Russell.
I'd like to propose that we make it Thursday the 23rd for personal reasons, as well as the officers' preference, but it certainly would be, for me, I couldn't attend on the 20th.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Is there a seconder for the 23rd? Yes, there is. Further comments? Councillor Foster.
As a member of the Personnel Committee, I wouldn't be able to attend on the 23rd as a Central Beds Ward Councillor. The Central Beds Council full meeting is on the 23rd of Feb. So that presents us with a little dilemma if there are other members of that committee. But if I'm the only one, members may make a decision on that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Knight.
In a similar way, unfortunately, I would be unable to attend on the 23rd, so I'd have to send my apologies on that day.
Okay, Councillor Pullinger.
I'll be unable to attend on either the 20th or the 23rd, but don't let that stop it being changed.
We even be core. How many do we need to be core at? 3? It's 3, isn't it? Yeah, okay, we'd actually be core at then. Right, I think members are just going to have to factor this into their decision making. Is there anyone else on Personnel Committee? Councillor, you're on Personnel Committee, are you? Would any of you like to comment or not? Councillor North?
Well, I won't be able to make it on the 23rd.
You will?
Will not.
Will not. Okay, Councillor Thomas? You can. Councillor Foster? That's nice of you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Strawn?
All things equal, I'll be available.
Perfect. And Councillor Ramsey's available. Good, I'm glad we did this exercise. So we have a proposal. The proposal has been seconded. It is a decision for council when meeting dates are set, so even members who are not on the personnel committee can still vote on this. So all those in favour of moving the meeting to Thursday the 23rd, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? Sort of. Any abstentions? We'll take it, everybody else abstains. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I guess this is not ideal, but obviously these are important matters, and I can understand why the chairman feels as though he needs to be there, some of the things that he's overseeing. Item 9D, Ivor Medical Centre. So this is a stakeholder update for members to consider a motion by Councillor Straw. The motion states that council to debate the issues affecting the town as a result of the decision not to proceed with the health hub and the attached correspondence received concerning the Ivor Medical Centre, and that a meeting be set up with other parties as appropriate. Councillor Straw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I felt that this was a matter sufficiently important for the town. It should be on the agenda and it should be discussed by the town council. I have my own views on a number of issues, but first I'd like to thank the Bedford, Luton and Milton Keynes Integrated Care Board for at least putting us in the picture and writing to us, because I am concerned at the lack of consultation there seemed to be over the health hub with us, a notification which has been ongoing and expected for years in this town. I know Councillor Bond made some very good points in Central Bedfordshire Council on that, for which I would thank him, but I think we need to be brought into these discussions as a town council with the appropriate bodies, because the impact on the town and the combination of the two, of the Ivor Medical Centre and the lack of the health hub. If the health hub was coming into being, it might have alleviated one issue in part, but as it is, we seem to be drawing a very, very short straw for this town. We're a growing town. We're struggling with health provision at the moment. I am concerned that, notwithstanding the letter from the Integrated Care Board, that we know there's been recruitment issues with regard to the medical profession within the town, and I'm not sure how this is going to work. And I would basically like that we get a meeting with all the appropriate bodies, including our MP, so that we can discuss this, find this out, and represent the town to ensure that we get the best provision possible in all the circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Strawn. So was there a proposal in there essentially for a meeting with the health professionals that we've met with in the past?
It goes beyond that in terms that we need to meet with the people dealing with the hospital, and I think we should be inviting our MP along to that as well, because he may have more influence in other spheres than us, but obviously to work with Central Beds, who, from what I've read in the paper, and I'll be corrected on this by Councillor Bond because he was instrumental in that discussion, I think, that we need to work together to get the solutions and find the solutions and make whatever difficulties there are as minimal as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Strawn. Okay, is there a seconder for that proposal? There are seconders. Councillor Pullinger wishes to speak.
Thank you. So yeah, I think it's a very good idea that we do facilitate a meeting with all of the relevant stakeholders in this, and particularly our MP, who I believe last week actually raised the issue of the Biggleswade Health Hub in Parliament. So I think there's definitely some interest from him on this topic. I think it's, I guess, disappointing that in some ways, at least, that the GP partnership have decided to resign. But there has been some communication today from the Integrated Care Board about what the impact on patients is, which hopefully is negligible, at least in the short term. But I think as interested residents in the town, we really ought to do our best to represent our residents to get the information to in a bit more detail, to be able to share that, and also put views of residents forward, and also to push again for some of the health investment that this town sorely needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? No. So one of the, I can confirm that I've actually been in touch with one of the stakeholders we're talking about, and they are keen for a meeting of the sort that you are suggesting actually Councillor Strawn. So if I may say that from the chair, I hope it would be warmly received by all stakeholders. So if Richard Fuller is coming, we'd need to be probably careful to do that probably on a Thursday evening when he's on his way back from Parliament. So are there any last comments? No. So all those in favour of Councillor Strawn's proposal to arrange a meeting with these with the GP's practices, Richard Fuller and the Integrated Care Board, please show. That is unanimous again. Thank you. Item 9E, stopping up of highway at land off Drove Road, adjacent to A1 Drove Road, Biggleswade. I think we've seen this before. For members to receive and consider the correspondence from the Secretary of State for Transport. Are there any comments on this? Councillor Woodhead.
It's a bit of jargon. What exactly does stopping up mean?
I think it means that it ceases to be the public highway.
Okay, but just grammatically, that's terrible wording. That's sort of stopping up. But no, it was still a bit unclear from the letter because it's just full of jargon. But I'm not 100% sure what they're actually asking us to do, apart from their use of stopping up. But I say it's not clear what stopping up is. But
I think yes, we moved.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's no problem.
Councillor Russell, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say that we've already had this on the agenda when it was up for consultation. So this should have been an item for information rather than discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So we are noting that. Okay, moving on. So item 9F, tree felling in Biggleswade Town Centre for members to receive and consider a written report from the Head of Governance and Strategic Partnership. Krim, is there anything to add or to comment on this report?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly to say that this topic came up on the recent Biggleswade Joint Committee for discussion, and it was my understanding, short of having the minutes ready yet for that, but from the actual meeting that obviously a longer gap in between taking the existing trees out and inserting new ones is vastly preferable and in the interest of the wider square and wider work underway. And that seemed to be agreed by attendees at the meeting in principle.
Thank you. Thank you, Krim. If I may say from the chair, I think when we discussed this last, was it councillor as TCM? I think our view, at least as a town council, was we accept that the trees need to go. We want to know which ones they are, but don't replace them yet until we're sure that's where we want them to be. But that was where I think we left it. Councillor Russell.
That's exactly right, Chairman. And what we were talking about at the Joint Committee was that we need to know what's happening with the bus exit lane, basically, and what we can do with our market square. And there's no point in replacing trees if they're not going to be in the right place, and we're going to regret replacing them where they currently are. So we made it very clear at the Joint Committee that they're saying that in their budget for the next financial year, they will have time to look at the bus routes after the transport interchange is implemented. So we said, okay, well, that's the discussion. I mean, we've already started the discussion. So I talked about the fact that we'd already made a proposal to Central Beds. The officer who was attending, I don't know, I've never come across him before. I'm not quite sure what his role is, but we made it quite clear. And obviously there were Central Bedfordshire representatives there. So the upshot of that was that we don't look at replacing the trees until the autumn at the earliest, if we've got some idea of what will happen with the market square at that point. Otherwise, it may well be later than the autumn. It might be next spring, rather than doing it immediately. But we made it quite clear that the ground, that they're going to take the trees out and the ground needs to be flattened so that there are no trip hazards.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate this is, I think Joint Committee was on Thursday actually, wasn't it? Which is when this pack came out. So it's almost slightly predates the conversation you've had. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So I agree with everything that's been said. So I'm just wondering whether we need to actually write to central beds and formalise this, or whether the discussion at joint committee was sufficient. Would there be value in the council writing to officers at central beds saying we recognise the need to remove the trees, but we would like to agree the design and layout of the strategic changes we'd like to see in the town centre in the future design and layout before any new trees are planted, and we would like to meet with them as early as possible in the new financial year.
Is that a proposal? Councillor, that sounds like it is a proposal. Okay, so
I'm quite happy to second that. It never does any harm to put it down in writing.
thank you. So that's a proposal and that's been seconded. So that basically says, we support removing them, flattening, but replace in consultation, hopefully with us about, well, definitely with us, about where those trees would be. And we'd do that certainly towards the latter half of 2023 at the earliest. We can still engage in a debate about species, etc., as and when time comes around, but to go swiftly in that direction is probably not the position of this council. Councillor Russell.
If I could just add, I mean, if we're trying to do a better layout for the market square for events and for the market, of course, we may want to remove one or two other trees, in which case, there may be other changes to make. So for me, it's important to be strategic and, do the planning and get it right.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I'm just in terms of the types of trees that we might consider. I think that piece of work is still beneficial to do that in advance of any decision about when they might be done, so that the work is already in place. So, and I agree with everybody else. I think it's important that we do right and make it formal, so that it's on record rather than us make an assumption the officers will have taken note of the joint committee.
Perhaps we could all do a little bit of research into types of trees that pigeons don't like, and see whether they're viable. It's a fair point. Any last comments? Councillor Strawn.
Just on the types of trees, I think we should be conscious of the effects that the roots have, because its roots have caused considerable difficulties in there. So we need to make sure that we're getting trees that will not undermine buildings and footpaths, etc.
Of course. Councillor Russell.
The problem with the trees we've got is that they were not planted deep enough.
Right.
So, yes, we do need trees that are the right sort, but they need to be planted properly, not in the way that they were planted in the late 1990s.
Thank you. Okay, we have a proposal. The proposal is to write to central beds just to formalise our position, which is that whilst we're comfortable with those 4 trees being removed and being made safe, that we don't want to see new trees go in until we can engage in a discussion about exactly where those trees are going to go. And that's in tandem with conversations about the bus exit lane. Is that a fair summary? All those in favour of that proposal, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you. Item 9G, car parking tender update report. For members to receive and consider a written report from the place shading manager. Isaac, do you have anything to update us on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just with thanks to Councillor Knight for his comments as Chairman of TCM, there's just some small number of minor changes to be made to the report, mostly focused around wording that would be incorporated into the final version before being advertised on the Crown Commercial Services framework, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So I had quite a lot of input into the draft, and thank you to Isaac for bearing with me as I made numerous comments. I think it's pretty good. Unfortunately, I was a bit tardy, and some of my last comments didn't make it into the report before the deadline. So the only things in there that I was a little unhappy with was the proposal that the signage is part of the tender, and my view is that the signage should probably be, the control of the signage should be retained by the town council, because I think it's our brand. And I think that gives us more ability to make sure that the signs are easy to read, accessible, and written in the way we would like. But of course, we should consult with any supplier to make sure that we meet the legal requirements. And then a technical detail, I think there's a requirement in here that we hold spare batteries on the shelf. And I made the observation that if we held spare batteries on the shelf where they have a shelf life, so they would probably wear out at the same time as the ones in any units, it would actually be better to say we want to make sure any batteries that are used are very standard and easily obtainable, rather than actually having them aging on the shelf and being useless in 5 years' time. But other than that, I think it's overall very, very good.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. So are you making a proposal?
Yeah, so subject to other comments in the room, I propose, and I'm sure there will be some, I propose that we approve this draft tender document with whatever further amendments are made this evening.
Thank you. Is there a second for that proposal? Councillor North has seconded. Any further comments? No. If I may say from the chair, something that I've sort of picked up on is that it's quite a broad tender document in that we're specific in certain ways, but also open to new ideas about what might be on the market. And, it's nice that we might have a few different bids that, if they're no good, they're no good, but it's nice to have that option available sometimes. Okay. Are there any last comments? Councillor Foster.
I'll just go. I've got to say, I think it's very comprehensive, very detailed. I think it lays it out for potential companies that want to tender very clearly what's required, which I think is to be welcome for all specifications. I think we've gone into the nth degree. We've made it quite clear what we're looking for. I think as technology moves on, I think that certainly the option for mobile phone updating is something that's important. I think I've read that that's something that's in the specification. I think trying to make it as user friendly for people that are parking as much as possible. So I can't remember the exact. Is there a requirement for a specific ticket that we're looking for, or would it be that the option would do both? Because I think, is it one or the other? I think I've got the impression that the way I read it, that it requires a ticket, but then it also, the specification requires an option for people to increase the length of time that they're parking. How does that work? I wasn't clear on that.
Isaac?
I suppose it's to hear tenderers' thoughts on how it could work. Thanks.
Okay. Any last comments? No. So we have a proposal to adopt this tender document and to follow the process as outlined in this document, subject to those two minor tweaks that Councillor Knight mentioned. So all those in favour of that proposal, please show. That's unanimous again. Thank you, everybody. Item 9H, Rose Lane car park update for members to receive and consider a written report from the place shaving manager. So this is regarding drainage, I believe. Isaac, is there anything to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So after reviewing budgets with the finance manager, he's kindly advised there's £4,000 available to be fired across from the Democratic Representation and Management Cost Centre, but more specifically the election provision account code, as it wouldn't be needed this financial year. So it may therefore implicate on the recommendation to proceed next financial year if instead council decided to proceed as soon as possible.
Okay, so there is budget for this. Yeah, thank you. Comments? Councillor Alban.
Thank you. Is it still the case that there is some drainage from the public highway into the Rose Lane system?
Isaac?
I'm not sure. I'd have to review the drainage survey reports again, if I'm honest.
Okay. Councillor Bond?
I think what Councillor Alban's saying here is because when the car park was being surfaced all that time ago, they found all the road gullies actually entered into the car park, and that was meant to be resolved at the point. I'm not, obviously that's probably the issue what might still be there.
Okay. Councillor Knight.
Thank you. I've got some concerns about this. So it was before my time as a town councillor, but quite a lot of money was spent improving that car park. And I remember almost immediately there were drainage problems. So I don't think the works that were undertaken, which included resurfacing the car park, left us with a car park that had perfect drainage. I haven't had the opportunity to see the condition reports, and I think I would like to see those, and I would like to see much more detail about the work that is proposed before really being willing to support this level of investment. My worry is we could take the car parks back to the condition they were in when they were, if you like, refurbished, and they still flooded. And I don't want to spend any money if it's not, we're not sure, if there's not a warranty saying it's going to fix the problem. And I just worry we could be throwing good money after bad. So at this stage, with the information available to me, I'm afraid I can't support this.
Okay, I'm going to come to Councillor Strawn. We'll come back to that point in a moment. Councillor Strawn.
I appreciate Councillor Knight's comments. That car park, from the time I've been in the town and on the town council, has always had flooding problems, and it possibly always will. I don't think the budget proposal here is excessive. To remedy it properly, I think would be actually probably a horrific amount of money. And I think that we've got to make the best we can of the job. If we ever own the freehold of it, might be something totally different. But with the lease we've got, I think we've just got to try and make the best of a bad job. I'm sure there is a flooding issue there, and there probably will be indefinitely from just the experience I've had so far, unless there was a radical change.
Thank you. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you.
With your microphone, please.
Thanks. I agree largely with Councillor Knight in that without understanding the detail of what the remediation works are, it's difficult to support this at this point. So I guess what I'd like to propose is that we defer this, and that that information is shared with members, along with having a greater understanding of to what level we are required to complete maintenance and repairs. If that site has always flooded, then I wouldn't expect it to be our liability to make it so it doesn't flood, unless that's something that's specifically mentioned within our lease. So I'd like to understand those issues more before we spend money that I don't think we necessarily need to spend. And in terms of the usage of the car park at the moment, I appreciate that there's potential for it to reduce our income due to some of the car park not being available, but in practice the car park isn't full, and so I don't think we are in practice losing income. And and there's a balance really between what's the lost income versus what investment we make, and actually if there isn't a business case to support this, then it'll be difficult to consider. So as I say, I propose we defer this until we can consider it with more information.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that proposal? Okay, there is a seconder for that proposal. Councillor Foster is indicating.
Yeah, I'd like to make the point on the second, under the summary, this figure excludes a fundamental recommendation to empty and wash down all soakaways, which should happen on an annual basis and has not been done for a considerable time. This is a fundamental thing that needs been doing and hasn't been done for a considerable time. How long hasn't it been done? Why hasn't it been done? And how much has this contributed to the fact that we have a lake there every time there's any amount of rain?
Thank you. Peter, did you want to comment on that? Do you know, or Isaac, do you know the answer to that question?
Shall I comment first? Is that okay? So, I'll let Isaac intervene in a minute and talk some more about that. I don't have an absolute sense about when the last time that was done. I should imagine it was quite some number of years ago, I should imagine. I've got three observations really to make, and I think number one, I sympathise with members' quandary connected to this. There is an interesting range of cost associated with this, from something which is relatively quite low to something which is significantly high. And you don't quite know what levels of money is required to fix it, and if indeed can we fix it. There has been, one of the reasons why this is here today for you is that there has been some interest from local residents who live nearby and the users of the car park to encourage us to maintain it as best we can. And I'll just leave it at that. What officers are also thoughtful about, again, without going into too much detail, is the contractual obligations that the council may have associated with maintaining the car park to an appropriate level, which is consistent when it took it on. So I think some of these issues need to be further explored.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Councillor Russell. I think some of those residents' concerns might be just slightly exaggerated. I think. Councillor Russell.
There are several things I'd like to say. First of all, the soakaways were completely cleared out when we resurfaced the car park. When we spent over 100,000 on that car park, it was completely cleared. So unless somebody's going to say, well, the contractor didn't complete the job. It's not that many years since it was cleaned out. The next thing is that when we first took on the lease of the Rose Lane car park, it was not surfaced. We have improved the landlord's property to a large extent. It was just a gravel car park, and as Councillor Strawn has already said, there were huge puddles every time it rained, and it was not pleasant for parents taking kids to St Andrew's School, trying to tramp through the mud on the way to school. So I mean, it needs to be checked legally, but I can't imagine that we have any obligation as far as the lease is concerned. And I think I'd actually forgotten what Councillor Bond said, but it's quite right that we need to know from Central Beds exactly where the drainage of those gullies go. And I know that Mr Lord and Mr Hosseini met somebody from Central Beds because the residents have been complaining to Central Beds about our car park. And the officer from Central Beds, the engineer, was adamant that our car park could not possibly be a danger to the flooding of their houses. Now that's ridiculous when you think of the inclines up to the road, and even to Barnet Close, there's an incline, although it's less steep. And I do walk through the car park quite often, so I see the extent of the flooding. So I think we don't need to be bullied by residents, but I think we do need to ask Central Beds to let us know exactly where their gullies drain to. I'm adamant that the soakaways were cleaned out not that many years ago. I forget how many years it was when the car park was resurfaced, but it's not that many years ago. It's not as if it's been tens of years that it's not been done. So can we please establish the gullies issue? And I'm interested that somebody's saying in the quote that it has to be done every year. I'm a bit surprised by that, because prior to the surfacing and the gullies being, the soakaways being cleared out then, it obviously hadn't been done for years and years and years, because each of the soakaways was full of gravel and rubble, because obviously when it was a gravel car park, the soakaways were being filled with washing off the surface of the gravel. So I think there's quite a lot to look into there. As far as the recommendations were going, engage with local residents. Well, we should also always keep our residents informed of what's going on, but it should be a general information to residents, not to people who are making, if I might say so, somewhat silly accusations against what might be happening with our car park and what might be a threat to their houses. So I'll leave it there, but I do think we need to check where the highways gullies are soaking away to.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do take into account sort of resident feedback. I think it's important, and clearly there is a drainage issue within the car park. It's not as if it's an urban myth. It is there. So I think it's important that we take that into consideration. We've also I've made note of the fact that we've had a survey. I think members aren't very clear exactly what actions might be required as a result of that survey. So I think it would be helpful for members to have an understanding of that. The comments about the cleaning of the soakaways every year at £1,000 or whatever, I think we need to take that away and think and consider whether that's something that we want to do ongoing. In all honesty, and I know that with this made reference to the pumping station, I think that's a bit premature. I don't think that is something that's realistically viable at the moment. So I know that we're not being asked to support that at this stage, but let's try and do what we can for the residents, also the people that use the car park. It isn't pleasant. I think we should do what we can, albeit armed with knowledge.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I'm going to come to Councillor Russell, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Pullinger to restate his proposal.
I just wanted to make it clear that my comments about communications with residents were not about the actual flooding in the car park, but the allegations that our car park flooding was a danger to their houses, which is what was being said, which is not at all possible.
Yes. Peter, do you want to make one last comment?
So briefly, I mean, there was also some assertions that the flooding issues was going onto the main highway, I believe, as well, and that's proven not to be the case.
That's some new laws of physics if it's getting up there. Councillor Knight, I'm going to come to you and then I'm going to ask Councillor Pullinger to...
I had understood, but I may be mistaken, that the gullies were cleared at least partially as part of the investigation work to allow them to see what was going on, but we don't need to dig into that detail. But it sounds like the consensus is to defer this while we dig into it. I just have one other maybe slightly crazy idea we might consider, which is if it is uneconomic to actually stop it flooding, is it possible to consider whether the area where it floods could be converted into a garden or something like that? We'd lose a few parking spaces, but it might, by not having people parking there and having something that absorbs the water, depending on where the water table is, it might actually be a more effective long-term solution. Something to consider, perhaps radical.
I think that is radical. I would just stress that those parking spaces, if I may say from the chair, those parking spaces are used a lot by residents who are dropping children at St Andrews, which obviously when it's wet is not ideal. But given that sort of 300 and something days of the year, almost all of them are fine. Be a little bit careful. Councillor Pullinger, do you want to just restate your proposal with your microphone on? And
yeah,
we'll go.
So my proposal is that we defer consideration of this until we have more information, that being the detail of the remediation works that are proposed and of what our actual legal obligations are in respect of the lease and maintenance in respect of flooding, bearing in mind the various comments that other members have made.
Most notably around gullies which may be going into the car park and also probably the current state of the gullies as part of that remediation work. Okay, is the seconder still happy with that? Yes. Okay, are there any last comments? No. All those in favour of the proposal, please show. That's everybody. Thank you very much. And thank you for the work on this, because it is a long-standing issue for Biggleswade, but it's one that I think we need to be careful about, because we've got this car park on a good 15-year lease, I think, and so if we're going to do something, I think we need to understand whether we're going to keep doing it. So thank you ever so much. Item 9I, CCTV update for members to receive and consider a written report from the place shaping manager. Thank you again for another written report. Anything to introduce on this, Isaac?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. So there's some updates to the report. So works to install CBC's digital line on the 16th of January did not go ahead. Officers have continued to press CBC for delivery of their new digital line, and after chasing, received communications from CBC officers stating the following. They are continuing to apply pressure on BT and have escalated a formal complaint a few months ago after failing to deliver on their installation request since August 2021. There is no revised timescale at present, and CBC reiterated that only when the new line is completed will they be willing to novate the existing analogue line to BTC. BT have estimated a 4-week turnaround after being instructed to install the new digital line by BTC, but they cannot provide any assurances or guarantees on that time frame still. BTC officers have repeatedly asked BT and CBC for sight of their contract and have been refused, citing legal confidentiality. And lastly, BT's security specialist, surveillance and smart solutions officer has told officers they will investigate the very long delay to the new fibre installation for CBC and reasons specifically for Biggleswade.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Knight.
This is complicated. I've tried to understand it, and I think I might be close, but I'm not 100% sure. So maybe if I try to explain what I think the problem is, and that might be a clue as to what I think we should do. So we obviously have a partnership with the monitoring centre based in Stevenage, as do Central Beds, and there's currently an analogue line between Biggleswade and Stevenage. We would like that line to be converted to a digital line. Well, we would like a digital line because the cameras we're purchasing require a digital line. It is definitely cheaper and possibly quicker for us to get that new line if we are a customer of BT Openreach. We are not currently a customer of BT Openreach. So for us, we would like Central Beds to legally hand over that current analogue line, thus making us a customer, and thus we can order the new line and we get it cheaper because we're a customer. Now, at the moment, Central Beds are also ordering a new digital line from Biggleswade to their new monitoring centre that isn't in Stevenage, that's somewhere else. Now, they're already a customer of BT Openreach because they have lots of lines, but they are unwilling to hand over the analog line to us, which will give us the cheaper price, until they've got their new line and they can commission their new line in their new control center. And presumably the reason for this is someone somewhere fears that if they hand the line to us, we might stop paying for it and we might turn it off and they will lose the ability to monitor their cameras. So they are saying, no, we're not going to hand it over to you. So we have a bit of a stalemate. It's taking far longer than anyone expected for CBC to get their new line. And in the meantime, the only way we could possibly order the line is if we do it as a brand new customer, and then we have to pay several £1,000s more, both in terms of the upfront charge and the reoccurring charge. I don't think CBC have any reason to worry, and I think we can commit that if they legally pass title to us in the same way we have been paying them for many years, because we've been sharing that line effectively, they could continue to pay us for the line they need and we would not have it terminated, because don't want to turn that line off until they no longer need it. It's just we want to legally have title to that line, which will enable us to order the new line, which won't affect their existing line. So it feels to me that there's a bit of a stalemate, and it feels like officers haven't been able to overcome that. And we need to find some way of reassuring Central Beds that if they hand the title of that line over to us, it will help us and we will not turn the line off. We will commit to maintaining that line as long as they pay for it. In the same way we've been paying them, they'll just be paying us. Simple, everyone's happy. Is that a fair summary of what needs to happen?
Karim?
Thanks for that. And thanks, Councillor Knight, for the excellent summary, essentially, of where we're at. Just one thing, though, we have been providing the assurance in written format and in meetings to CBC that we would definitely take the line on board, continue paying for it, have the 2 new lines installed, one for us, one for CBC. And several months after that were done, you know, as far as all the installations were concerned, then we would eventually switch off the analog line. We've been told back by CBC that they are happy to novate as long as that novation is linked to their new line being installed. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
Good. We got all of that for the minutes. Councillor Strawn.
A couple of points. I think Councillor Knight's explanation was very helpful. Now, CBC are obviously concerned about their own protection, which I can understand. If we enter into contractual obligation to take on the full responsibility for the line with the contribution from CBC, I see there's no sense in their blocking that unless they think they'll no longer be a BT customer and therefore have to pay the larger installation costs for their own line. So I think we should be going there and putting that forward in writing to them or without subject to contract basis, and suggesting that, and if necessary, raising it above their current officer level, because we have had considerable difficulties over many years now, since virtually the last election, to try and get this situation in place. And this is absolutely ridiculous. People just playing games and finding excuses not to achieve results. The question that I have that I'm not quite sure about is there's reference to BT will not supply at an appropriate rate to a non-BT customer. Are we a BT customer in, say, the council offices, the Orchard Centre, or any arrangements with BT, or are our telephone suppliers an alternative company?
Question, Karim or Peter? Or
Thank
Isaac?
you. Thanks, Councillor Strawn. We are a customer of BT with various other aspects, contractually speaking, but not specifically this one. When we pushed BT quite hard in terms of understanding our status, they basically said we are unrecognised for this kind of purpose. As such, we are behind. I'm paraphrasing essentially, but that's what essentially they told us, that we are behind CBC, who has the legal recognition of BT as a signatory on that contract.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the point is being missed. If it is down to being a BT customer, and that is the criteria, we are a BT customer, not necessarily for that line, but we are a BT customer. But let's see if we can sort something out with CBC, because this is just getting absolutely ridiculous.
I think it's not our officers you need to take that up with, but the CEO of BT, I suspect, Councillor Strawn, unfortunately. But Councillor Pullinger.
Yeah, just on Councillor Strawn's point, I think the issue is we're not a customer of BT Openreach. We would be a customer of BT standard, but not the Openreach arm of BT. I mean, I think ultimately the default position, unless we manage to get the agreement with CBC to innovate the line, is option 4. I can't see any circumstances in which we could agree to the increased costs, and ultimately that means we do have to wait if we cannot get agreement with CBC. But I agree with Councillor Strawn. I think we really need to use what political persuasion we can have, and also with higher levels of officer within CBC to try and move this forward. And if that is through a formal offer subject to contract to actually go into some form of legally binding agreement with CBC to maintain that line until such time as their line is installed, then I think that's the course of action we should take. And if that was a proposal by Councillor Strawn, I'm happy to second it.
All right, thank you. So we have a proposal on the table. Councillor Foster.
Just sort of follow on from that, really. So in terms of, for want of a better way of putting it, political pressure, would it be helpful if either myself or Councillor Bond were to have contact with the exec member to perhaps support the town council in that respect? So I think if the council is minded to do so, I'm happy to take that on, but I would obviously need all the details of emails backwards and forwards. Obviously there's no guarantees there, but I think if we can do something without wanting to go above the officers that you're dealing with, it seems to me that it does need that to actually get this thing moving. So happy to take that on if Councillor happy to do so.
Yeah, I presume you're happy to include.
I'm happy to include that within my proposal.
Yes, there's an action for officers. There's an action for officers there as well. Thank you. Okay, are there any last comments? No, so we have a proposal. That proposal is, essentially option 4 as outlined. Am I right in thinking, Councillor Pullinger?
Well, it's technically Councillor Strawn's proposal, but it was option 4. Option 4 is the default, but to push CBC to whether through a formal offer of a contractual arrangement with them and through members and political pressure to actually proceed with option, is it 1?
For whatever one is.
So we want the preferred option to be to actually novate the line prior to the installation of CBC's new line.
Option 1, yes.
Option 1.
Councillor Knight?
I just wonder whether it would be advantageous to invite the officer concerned from Central Beds to our next council meeting. It might help to ease the wheels.
Might not be a bad
If not, they could explain it to us in person.
Okay, you might be lucky, but should we try this first and see how we go? Is that okay? All right. All those in favour of the proposal as outlined, please show. Anyone against? No, that's unanimous. Thank you for your work on this, officers, and thank you, Councillor Knight. It's been exhausting, I'm sure. You're doing a grand job in difficult circumstances. Item 9J, design guide and housing policy technical guidance, SPD, Councillor Russell.
Supplementary planning
document. Oh yes, of course. Right to them, Councillor Foster. We can't be having these things. But Councillor Russell, you want to comment?
I think that this needs to be looked at carefully in line with our neighbourhood plan. For some reason, I've received an individual letter from Central Bedfordshire about this, and the consultation runs to the 1st of March. So I'd like to ask Council to defer this to our meeting on the 21st of February to give plenty of time to see how the proposals from Central Beds fit in with our neighbourhood plan, or where there might be a conflict, so that we can respond intelligently to their consultation.
Thank you. Okay, is there a seconder for that proposal? Yes, there is. Councillor Straw, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I think Councillor Russell's quite right. it's the impact on our neighbourhood local plan. There's, I think, over 200 pages to be gone through. So it's not something that we can deal with tonight. It's far too detailed. So that's the reason I'm seconding the proposal. And I'm afraid there's probably quite a bit of work to be done.
No doubt. Any further comments? No, so we have a proposal to defer this item to the 21st of February. All those in favour of that proposal, please show. It's unanimous again, thank you. Item 10, planning applications. 10A, land to north of Lindsell's level crossing, variation of condition number 8 of the planning permission, construction of new ramp step bridleway bridge. Comments, Councillor Russell.
Here we go again. This is a variation which includes our famous condition 3. There are some other variations which I'll speak about in a moment, but we know that we objected to the discharge of condition 3, but that condition was discharged by Central Beds on the 16th of November. And this new proposal came forward on the 22nd of November. And it's even less landscaping than the reduced proposal that we objected to before, which I find a bit cynical, actually. So they had a discharge of the condition on the 16th of November and come out with this on the 22nd of November, which is even less landscaping. So I do think we do need to object again strongly. It's really not acceptable. Now, there are some other issues in the variation, which I think we should possibly just note. They have altered the design of the bridge, but it's with shorter ramps, which I think is probably more acceptable. And there are some rights of way changes, which are just tidying up. And I think the rights of ways officers at Central Beds are content with those as well. So I don't think we need to worry about the shorter ramps or the rights of way changes. So my proposal is that we note the shorter ramps and the changes to the rights of way, but object strongly to even less landscaping than that agreed in the November 2022 discharge of condition. Sorry, I'm getting muddled up with the shorthand notes here. So we note the shorter ramps and the changes to the rights of way, but object strongly to even less landscaping than that agreed in the November 2022 discharge of condition.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Is there a seconder for that proposal to strongly object? Yes, there are seconders. Okay, any comments? Councillor Strawn.
Just a comment, and this relates to all planning applications. Some of us attended the planning training the other week, and there was a point there about our introductory paragraph to the observations, namely referencing the neighbourhood local plan. And although there may be points in the neighbourhood local plan that are relevant to this particular application, they're probably not. But will we be in future including a standard paragraph as was outlined in that course?
I would suggest that is probably a separate. That probably needs to come to council separately as an item for consideration on the agenda. We've always consistently, whenever we've objected, we've said subject to neighbours and our usual wording. It would be a case of bringing back all of that usual wording to say what a new paragraph would look like. So I don't think that's something that we can really do at this point because we don't have that template, if you like, approved by council. But Councillor Russell.
Councillor Strawn is quite right in what he says, and it's sort of on my to-do list to look at that because Dave Chetwin did give us a form of words that other parish councils have used about their neighbourhood plans. So perhaps between us, Councillor Strawn, we can come up with a proposal to council on that.
Perhaps that could be included on the next agenda as an up.
He's putting the screws on me to get the work.
You know, it's all right. You know how to get something on the agenda. That's absolutely fine. You've got to draft it first, though. Right. So 10A, we have a proposal to strongly object. Do we know what mechanisms are in place to call in variations of conditions to the planning committee? I don't know whether this has already been called in. I'm not sure the terms of reference of DMC.
I don't know whether this is something that can be called in or not, because the previous thing was an officer decision for
Yeah.
discharge.
Okay,
But
perhaps
we could check that.
Yeah, Councillor
Yeah.
Bond will know, won't he?
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favour of strongly objecting to the reduced landscaping, but noting the changes to the ramps and the rights of way, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you. Could we bring Councillor Bond back in, please? Item 10B, Harrison House, single-storey extension to the house swimming pool. Which one? Any comments? Subject to neighbours? All right. Yeah.
Only if they allow us to use it.
Only if they allow us to use it. We I'm afraid I don't think that's a very legitimate response for planning purposes, but I'm sure we could write to them, Councillor Ramsey. It looks very nice though. 10C, land off of Drove Road, 1A Drove Road. So this is discharge of conditions 6, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 21 against the planning permission, erection of 5 dwellings. Comments, please, Councillor Alban.
Seems to be a theme, discharge of conditions. So these conditions are things that must be in place before the development starts. And it includes things like an ecological enhancement assessment should be in place. Surface water runoff details should be in place. Noise mitigation should be in place. And various other things, including the stopping up order that we've already seen tonight should be in place. And that is in place. Other things that have been discussed at this council, the details of the relocation of the lamp column and bus stop. And that they were talked about when we discussed the planning application originally. So I really don't see why this discharge of all those conditions should be allowed. So I would propose that we object to the discharge of all the conditions 6, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13 and 21.
Okay, thank you. And the reason for objecting is that we'd want to see many of these things in place. We'd want to see all of these things in place.
Yeah, I mean, if
particularly the bus stop.
Yeah, they've only recently got the planning permission and they're already trying to discharge these conditions. If the conditions aren't there in place, then what is the result going to be? Are we going to end up with no proper noise mitigation for the residents of the new development from the adjacent car, the garage there?
Yeah.
It's a way of enforcing what we want to see.
Thank you. Okay, is there a seconder for that proposal? There is a seconder for that proposal. Comments? Councillor Bond.
I think the problem is that we're seeing things that wouldn't normally come to us. And by the time they've already come to us, they've already been discharged. The discharge of condition mechanism is usually to make sure that any condition laid out in a planning application is actually correctly ticked off as being achieved. Because some of these are, you can't start development until you achieve them. Now, it's a rarity for discharge conditions to come to council. The Lindsell's one was the exception over the landscaping, but it is not the norm. In the same way, the non-material amendments don't normally come to us. I need to dig out some information because a long time ago, we got sent a very detailed email which explained which types of planning application come to us. The Reg 3 ones don't. I mean, there's a whole lot of lists which we're consulted on, others not. So I think really the problem we have here is that we need to probably tidy up some of the way we manage the email addresses for when CBC properly notify us so we can see what we're meant to actually discharge on. There's no harm looking around to find out what's actually coming up. The fact is, unfortunately, by the time they've come to us, there's already a decision already been made.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Pullinger.
I think Councillor Bond has pretty much summarised most of what I was going to say. There is that list that we had, and the discharge of conditions is not something that we are statutory consultees for. In terms of what a discharge of condition is as well, it's not saying that condition no longer applies, it's saying that they have complied with it. So it could be, if the condition was to have a noise assessment carried out, the discharge of condition is saying that they have shared that noise assessment with the officers, and the officers are happy with it, and therefore they've discharged that condition. It's not to say that they no longer need to do a noise assessment. So I think, as Councillor Bond says, I think we need to tidy up our processes. I don't think this is something that we should necessarily have needed to consider at council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alban.
That on the CBC website, there is a comment from about the ecological enhancement assessment, which is one of the conditions that they want to discharge, and that comment is suggesting that it shouldn't be discharged.
Okay.
Or suggesting to me. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Thank you. Yes, this is a peculiar one, isn't it? And it's strange that we're considering it in the way that we are, I guess. Well, we have a proposal, and the proposal has been seconded. Are there any last comments? No, so the proposal is to strongly object to the discharge of these conditions. All those in favour of that proposal, please show. One, could you indicate properly, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. All those against that proposal, please show. Right, so that's carried. I assume everybody else has abstained. Councillor Russell.
Just to say that Councillor Bond has just confirmed that he's called in the variation of condition on Lindsell's to DMC.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Bond, and thank you, Councillor Russell. D, Park Corner Farm, Dunton Lane, variation of conditions numbers 2 and 10. This is an agricultural building. Comments? Be okay to note it? Note it. E, land to the south of waste transfer site at Cow Close. It's just discharge of conditions 4 and 12 against the planning permission for light touch temporary depot. We objected to this when we saw it for the first time. Does anybody have any comments on these conditions? Councillor Russell.
I'm not sure we can do anything about this. I mean, we objected for various reasons, not least that we didn't want development there in the first place. I think we just have to accept that it's going to happen, and it's discharge of conditions. So
do we just note
I think
these?
We just note it, yeah.
Okay. So, Councillor Bond.
If you're interested, I could tell you what those are.
Please.
So it's number 8 and 12. Is it 4 and 12? 4 and 12. The way you find this, all you need to do is look at the decision notice associated with the original planning application. So number 4 basically says no above ground development should take place until a scheme for protecting nearby residents from noise arising from the operation in connection with the use of hereby consented has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The scheme shall provide, basically it's a noise protection. The other one is number 12, wasn't it? Yeah. Which basically says noise from, this is actually a very useful one, actually. It's a very good condition. Noise from fixed external plant and building services shall not exceed the existing background noise levels, inclusive of any penalty for tonal, impulsive or any distinctive acoustic characteristics, whether measured or calculated according to the provision of whatever. To protect, basically what this is really saying is that you can't increase the amount of noise on the site.
Okay, I don't know how you could be louder than a freight train that's going past. Okay, well, we have a proposal to note this. Thank you for that detail, Councillor Bond. Are there any further comments? Does anybody want to do anything more than note it? No, then we note it. Thank you. Item 11, report on planning application outcomes. Any comments on the planning application outcomes? Note it. Thank you. 12, counts. So these are balance sheet detailing. Oh, sorry, stealing your thunder, Councillor Pullinger. Councillor Pullinger, do you want to comment on the accounts?
No comments. I just propose that we accept the account reports.
Thank you. I think Peter has a comment.
As documented, unless the clerk has something to.
It's all right.
Peter,
please. Welcome back. So I just wanted to add something to this. I've asked the finance manager to post all of our monthly accounts, all of the detail onto our website in the interest of financial transparency, and that should begin immediately. Thank you.
Super, thank you. So we have a proposal to accept the accounts as outlined. Is there a seconder for that proposal? There are seconders. Are there any comments? No. All those in favour of the adopting the accounts as set out, please show. Thank you, that's carried. Item 12, oh, no, 13, item for information. 13A, as to car parking, for members to receive an oral update from Councillor Russell. Councillor Russell, is there anything to update on this?
Well, at the last council meeting, we agreed to write back to ASDA, and I went away and drafted a letter in conformity with what council decided, and I think it went off to ASDA last Tuesday. And if you've read the Chronicle already contacted ASDA, and they said they couldn't comment because they hadn't received a letter from Councillor Russell. Well, they have now. So if I could just say, because I don't think that this has been circulated to councillors, and it perhaps ought to be, but it says, I refer to the response to my letter of 15th of December from your Head of Corporate Affairs. This is to Lord Rose again. Of course, your first concern is that your customers should be able to park easily, but the Town Council was surprised to hear that anecdotal evidence shows that there have been problems. It's not something that has ever been mentioned to councillors. However, it would seem odd if customers face difficulties in parking to introduce the facility of paid longer stay parking up to 1 month's duration. This would surely have the opposite effect. The response then goes on to say that no further changes are envisaged and that the time limit remains in line with the 6 car parks operated by the Town Council, which offer between 1 to 2 hours of free parking. This is somewhat disingenuous given that only one of our car parks is limited to 1 hour, the small facility on the Market Square, and that all our other car parks offer 2 hours free. Of course, what our car parks also offer is free unrestricted parking after 6 p.m. on weekdays and all day Saturday and Sunday, in order to support the nighttime economy and the use of the town centre at weekends, including for our charter market and organised events. The only reason there are weekday restrictions at all is to stop commuter parking for free instead of using the station car park where there is a charge. There are permit arrangements for people who work in the town centre. The response does not refer to the issue of when fines are imposed. We can only assume that the half-hour grace mentioned in the email from the ASDA Executive Relations team was wrong and that 5 minutes over an hour and a half will be fined. The Section 106 agreement from 2003 says that the supermarket, quote, shall consult with the council regarding the use and operation of the car park, taking notice of the council's observations, unquote. The Town Council would be pleased to have a dialogue with ASDA on this issue and its impact to try to find a solution that's less detrimental to the town. In my previous letter, I referred to the history of the relationship with ASDA and that it was always intended that the substantial car parking facilities at the store should be shared with the town. We recognise the importance of ASDA as an anchor store in Biggleswade and would prefer to work positively with you. Yours sincerely.
Thanks.
So we wait to see, there's been no response to that yet.
Thank you. Well, shall we keep this on the agenda for a couple of weeks' time? And we can revert then. Item 14. Yes, sorry, beg your pardon.
I saw on Facebook that there was one of the first aiders was fined for overstaying in ASDA when she was on duty at the Remembrance.
Yes,
because you
right.
were involved in that as well, weren't you? Has there been any more feedback?
Well, I understand that at Remembrance Sunday, somebody was in need of medical attention and somebody who had first aid training stayed to help this individual and had parked in ASDA. And when they ended up overstaying, and when challenging, my understanding from what I read on Facebook is that when they challenged ASDA over the fine and gave the reason because they were providing urgent medical attention to somebody who had had a serious trauma, the decision was to go ahead with the fine anyway. So it was not sufficient reason. You know, I'm not going to say potentially saving somebody's life because I don't know the details of the situation, but I do know that medical attention was being delivered for well over an hour after the incident happened. I hope the gentleman's okay, but it goes to show what we're dealing with here. Councillor Pullinger.
I'll just say the gentleman is okay.
Good. Thank goodness. Well, on that lively note, are there any last comments on ASDA? No, thank you for raising that, Councillor Ramsey, and thank you, Councillor Russell, for your ongoing efforts. Item 14, public open session. Have we been joined by anybody? No, and we haven't been joined by anybody in the chamber. We have no items recommended to be discussed under exempt, so this meeting is closed. Thank you.